but I still was like, you know what? I got this. I can do this on my own. I'm a very determined, driven person. I actually have a tattoo that says relentless. So in my stubborn head, I was like, I can do this on my own. I don't need to take medication yet. So I tried many things. I tried bribing myself, saying, you don't drink during the week and then drink on the weekends. And then on the weekends, I'll be like, okay, you can only have 4 drinks. And even though I had the best intentions, it never worked out that way.
Welcome, everybody. It's Katie with Thrive Alcohol Recovery. And today I have a really special guest with me. Today I have with me Marcela. And Marcela is not only a Naltrexone and Sinclair Method success story, but you're also a mom. You're also a former colleague of mine at RIA Health. So I know you kind of in different capacities going back several years. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be able to share your story with Naltrexone and the Sinclair Method, which to my understanding, it's something you started after you began working in this industry, right?
Yep, that is correct. I had already been working at RIA for, I believe, 2 years at that point, managing the enrollment team.
Okay. And for those that don't know, RIA Health is an online company and program that helps people with alcohol dependence using medication and coaching support. I used to work there for 3 years, an awesome company with awesome people. And that's how I met Marcela. And you've worked there for how long now?
It'll be 5 years in May.
Wow. Okay. So that's an interesting piece of your story, and I want to kind of start at the beginning, but it is interesting that you worked in this field aware that there were medications like naltrexone, but you still didn't start it right away. So we'll get into that, but I want to start at the beginning. So can you tell us a little bit about your drinking and your history with alcohol and kind of what led you to going on naltrexone?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just saying, Katie, my gray hair, I'll be 35 next week. And I started drinking when I was 14 years old. I had a pretty traumatic childhood in the sense of my parents were very emotionally unavailable. And so I was a teenager with no rules, no supervision, and I was lacking a lot of emotional support. And so I discovered alcohol at 14. It was a New Year's Eve party. I got super drunk off of Jack Daniels. And it just kind of kept going, like on the weekends, I would drink. And I did that, then into my 20s, I became a bartender. And again, that's all year round, right? Like I was just drinking all the time, like every single day. Like that's just what you do. I remember thinking several times throughout the years, like, oh my gosh, I can't remember the last 24 hours that I went without having a shot. And it was like kind of funny back then, but now that I think about it, it's not funny. Like that was something really serious, but I lived that way for many years. It was 17 years that I drank heavily and very consistently. And I don't know if you want me to get into like when I started drinking or taking naltrexone. But that's 17 years of my life I spent every weekend or almost every day drinking. Either like uh beer on the weekends at the pool or just like taking shots when I was working as a bartender. But it was a daily thing for me.
Yeah. It's interesting because in my videos, and I actually brought this up on a recent interview I did with another person who's around our age, mid to late 30s. Sometimes people tell me you're too young to have an alcohol addiction, like,
Yeah.
but like you and I started, it sounds like we had kind of similar journeys where we just started really young. And for someone to look at you and say you had 17 years of alcohol
Hmm.
issues, it's hard to believe, but it's true. And so going back to your story, it sounds like I kind of viewed it that way as well, where I just saw it as like a phase and a party phase and something that you're supposed to do. I mean, you as a bartender, certainly that's, what bartenders do. But
Hmm.
going back, did you realize how addictive alcohol was, or was it something you saw as like a phase? What was your perspective on it at that time?
It's a great question because I grew up going to like AA meetings because of my dad. So it was a big issue for my dad. And I remember, so many fights my parents got into when I was only like 3, 4 years old. And a story my dad loves to tell people is that when I was about 4 years old, he's a civil engineer, and his secretary asked me, like, what do you want for Christmas? Something very harmless to ask a 4-year-old. And then my answer was, I want for my dad to quit drinking. And
Oh,
yeah, I haven't talked about that in a long time. And so he says that that's kind of when he was like, I should probably do something about it. And he started, this was over 20 years ago. So he started going to AA. And it worked well for him. It worked well in the sense that he was able to quit drinking. And he's still sober to this day. So I kind of grew up knowing like alcohol is addictive, alcohol can be bad. Part of my brain knew that. But then the other part is like I found so much comfort in it when I was lacking so much emotional support and just like attention. Um, that as a teenager, the two thoughts didn't really cross. And I became addicted unintentionally to it. And I stayed addicted for 17 years.
yeah. That's like, and what you said earlier too about the kind of environment you grew up in with your childhood. I didn't know that about you. And it's something really similar to me. Like, I love my parents. There's no hard feelings there, but also didn't really have much structure, was able to do whatever I want, which I thought was
Mhm.
super cool at that age. But it also didn't give me like a framework for like, be careful about alcohol or be careful about this
Mhm.
or that. So just an interesting part of your story as well. And my dad also quit drinking through AA. So we have a lot in common there. Um, so yeah, you struggled with your drinking for 17 years. So what led you to realize this was becoming problematic? Because like we talked about, you were working in the field for 2 years before you started on naltrexone. So were you trying to kind of, control it on your own? What made you realize, okay, this is something I need like to seek treatment for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was several years to where another big part of my story is that I'm very happily married now to an amazing human. But before him, I was in a very abusive marriage for about 7 years. And I say that's a big part of my story because he really struggled with alcohol addiction as well. And we lived together, obviously, right? So like I was also drinking a lot during that time. And once I left him, then I continued to use alcohol as like a coping mechanism for all the trauma that I had just been through. And so I continued that for a little bit, but then I started, going to trauma therapy and really working on my own healing. And that's kind of when I started realizing all of my negative coping mechanisms and all of my patterns. And I was getting terrible hangovers that I didn't realize at the time. I was on, borderline like severe withdrawals, like the anxiety and like the chest pains. And it was just really bad. And we would just say, like, oh, Marcela just gets really bad hangovers. But that kind of started triggering something in my brain that I was like, I don't like, I think I need to do something about this. Like I need to control my drinking. So at this point, I was already working for RIA. I was still kind of new, but I was learning a lot about it. But I still was like, you know what? I got this. I can do this on my own. I'm a very determined, driven person. I actually have a tattoo that says relentless. So in my stubborn head, I was like, I can do this on my own. I don't need to take medication yet. So I tried many things. I tried bribing myself, saying, you don't drink during the week and then drink on the weekends. And then on the weekends, I'll be like, okay, you can only have 4 drinks. And even though I had the best intentions, it never worked out that way. I would always drink during the week and I would justify it in my head by saying, oh, it was a stressful day. I'm cooking dinner, not a big deal. And then on the weekends, same justification like it's the weekend, it's not a big deal. And I continued on that cycle for a while. I then try like supplements, I would go to Google and be like, what supplements help you with alcohol craving? So I did try several things because I was stubborn to be like, I can do this on my own. And then I realized after 2 years, like, no, I can't. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. Like, I know how successful this is, but I think there's just so much shame around it still that in my head, I was like, I can do this. Like, I don't need to ask for help.
Yeah. Some people, I mean, I get messages a lot like, oh, I don't think my drinking's bad enough for medication,
Mhm.
or that seems like an extreme solution. Or even me, I'm very determined in certain ways as well. And I would seek out super healthy food and exercise and supplements. But then that one thing was the alcohol, which was such a contradiction to like what I valued in life. But I couldn't get it figured out. And I was hesitant to go on a pharmaceutical as well because I was huge on just trying natural things. But
Mhm.
man, naltrexone really is a game changer.
Yep.
So, tell us, like, you kind of described it a bit, but what was your drinking like leading up to naltrexone? And once you started it, what did you notice? Like the first, like, let's say, couple of weeks on the medicine.
Yeah. So at that time, I was averaging about probably 20 to 25 drinks per week. And the worst for me was on the weekends. Like, I would start drinking at like 11 o'clock and just I kind of keep drinking all day. So I could easily have 12 drinks in one day. So probably averaging about 20 to 25, sometimes 30 drinks during like a course of the week. And when I started taking Naltrexone, I actually did log my drinks for the first couple of weeks. I wish I would have done it for longer, but when you're in it, I just didn't think to keep doing it. But after the first week, I went from that average to about 11 drinks. And so that was huge. And then the second week, I think I had like 13 drinks. I went a little bit up, but not as much as I had been. And then that number continued to decrease for me. And what I really noticed is that you're really stuck in your habit. So for me, it was of course like the habit of like after a long day of work, and you start making dinner, or on the weekends, like I said, it was just so much of the habit that I had around it. And honestly, I was really scared to go to social functions without it, because in my head I had always said like alcohol equals fun, social activities equals your drinking. And I had done that for almost 2 decades. So I did have this fear that I was like, how am I supposed to have fun with that alcohol? Like, I can't even imagine that life. And, to my surprise, with naltrexone, and that's the reason that I wanted to start with naltrexone. I didn't want to just like quit drinking completely immediately, because I wanted initially to learn how to be like a normal drinker, like a social drinker. Like I saw my family members or my husband be able to like have 2 drinks and stop. I couldn't do that. So I really wanted with naltrexone to become a social drinker, and I was able to do that after a few weeks. So that alone was completely life changing for me.
Wow. So it sounds like you responded pretty quickly to naltrexone, seeing like a 50% reduction in your drinking in the first week or two, which is just incredible. I'm sure that was really encouraging for you to see that. I mean, yeah, what was that like? Because you mentioned some days having like up to 12 drinks. So
Mhm.
that first weekend, were you just able like to have an off switch or something? Like how did your drinking reduce so much?
Yeah, I mean, I was like I was determined to make it work, because I knew like I want to do this. So I think I was consciously paying attention to the cues. And, I was very good about following the TSM protocol, which is, like take the medication an hour before your first drink. So I was really following the rules because I wanted to be successful. And yeah, I think that that first weekend, or just even logging my drinks, like I was really excited to realize like, this is working for me. So I need to keep doing it. And I think the off switch, it was just like, I would drink, but it just didn't taste the same, and it didn't taste bad. Naltrexone doesn't make drinks taste bad or anything. It's just that it didn't feel as exciting. And I could really taste the alcohol part of it, which before I couldn't, and I thought that was so weird. But you just notice those changes, and if you're really paying attention to it, like, and you lean into it, it's just amazing what the medication can do for you.
Yeah, I know what you mean about tasting the alcohol more. I remember after a while on naltrexone, it's like when I would drink wine, all I would taste was like vinegar and alcohol. I like lost the ability to
Mhm.
taste the wine. It was very
Yeah.
bizarre. Um, So you brought up several things that I think are important and honestly essential to success with this journey, but can oftentimes be challenging. For me, probably the hardest parts of this journey was the habit piece. Like you mentioned, that common scenario I hear a lot of people say is like, I have wine while I cook dinner, and then I have a second glass of wine. And then by the time I'm eating dinner, I'm on my third or fourth. And that ritual is something that's so ingrained. So the habitual piece, that's difficult to break. And also, I mean, your belief system around alcohol's role in your life. Like, who am I going to a social function without drinking?
Yeah.
Like, that's a very real fear and concern and question people have, especially you. You've been drinking like your whole adult life. So, can you talk about how you navigated the habit change, the mindset shift that was required to become somebody who, genuinely had control again over alcohol?
Um, yeah, so the habit change was like a big thing for me. And I think, I did have, I would say, like a leg up in it because what I did for work. So I was surrounded by these like doctors and just information. Like this is what I did every day. So I had the logical information to understand like so much of it is your habit. So I, consciously knew that, in my non-drinking days, I was really trying to do other things that brought me joy. But the thing is, though, like when you don't drink as much because of the medication, or you're not so mentally obsessed with it, like when's the next time I'm gonna have a drink, like it opens up a lot of more brain space for you to be able to focus on other things that bring you joy. So I started reading again. I started going to the gym again. I actually joined a CrossFit gym, and right now I'm in the middle of getting my certification to become a CrossFit coach. So I do know that I consciously decided like I'm going to replace that exciting feeling that I was getting from alcohol with something else that will bring me joy that is good for me instead of drinking.
Yeah, that's such a huge part of it. And I mean, Marcella, it just sounds like you were honestly really ready for the change. Like you'd been kind of trying to fix this for years on your own. And by the time you started Naltrexone, you were just ready. And I think like that's a huge part of it that we can't quite, recreate person to person, like that own intrinsic motivation to change. Because without that, it's easy to keep pursuing the habits and not seek out these other things because it takes effort to go to a CrossFit gym and be the new person there and pay for a membership and be bad at something for a while before you get good
Oh
at
yeah.
it. So there has to be something there driving it. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, honestly, it like I can even compare it to like any of my other habits right now. Like a bad habit that I'm trying to overcome is like my financial habits, like online shopping and Amazon. And it's so easy for me to just do it. And I'm still justifying it in my head, even though I have a budget that I'm like, I'm going to stick to it. I honestly just don't think I've processed it enough or that I'm ready enough to commit to it. So, I mean, I think it goes for everything. Like, you have to be truly ready to make a change for yourself. And you can have your whole family begging you or your doctor telling you to quit. But if you are truly not ready for it, the chances of working are going to be a lot less.
Yeah.
So I was definitely very ready to make a change.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about the other habits because I too notice like the bad habits I have, and I always think back to my TSM journey because I'm like, I was able to break that habit. Like, what's the difference here? And I do think it's that like, yeah, do I really want this change? Like what's the future ahead? You with your finances, okay, if in a year from now I save $5,000 because I'm not doing impulse purchases, like for me, like reminding myself of that why and
Yeah,
revisiting it over and over again is helpful. But I mean, habits are hard to break, right?
they are.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So if you could describe like what naltrexone did for you versus what you did to, as I say, like meet the medicine halfway, what did that picture or journey look like for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I do want to also share because I think it's a really important part of my story, and it does make me emotional to talk about it. But the reason that I finally hit a point where I was like, something has to change. So I have two kids. My daughter is now 10. My son just turned 3. And I started this journey when my son was 6 months old. So at that time, my daughter was 7. She had already seen me her whole life with the addiction and what it was causing to me, or for me, like the terrible panic attacks when I was hungover and just like us drinking on the weekends. And I knew I had already done some damage to her with it by just seeing it. But then I had my son, and like I said, 6 months old, and I saw myself going through that pattern again. And I remember, like, after one night of, just binge drinking, and I remember like throwing up that night and then just waking up the next day and just kind of having a moment of like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I cannot do this for myself. And I definitely can't keep doing this for my kids. Um, so I think as parents, that's really powerful because I'm not only breaking the cycle for myself, but I'm breaking it for them. And I would say that was like my quote unquote rock bottom time, even though it wasn't anything terrible. I didn't do anything bad. I just knew that's not the mom I wanted them to have, and that's not the mom that I wanted to be. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I thank you so much for speaking to that because I know a lot of parents are watching this and can relate and they love their kids so much. And I'm sure that's this like internal conflict. Like, had you not known about naltrexone and you're in these cycles, you're like, what's wrong with me? I want to be a good mom, but I keep doing this. And it's such a terrible, shameful internal dialogue we go through trying to crawl our way out of this. And I mean, I'm so thankful that you knew about naltrexone and that as an option. Um, and that alone, I mean, that motivator alone is huge. And I know a lot of people when I talk to them, they want to do it for their kids, but like you said earlier, being ready to change, like even your kids or your family could be begging you, but if you don't have that internal drive and desire to change, it's really hard to commit to it.
yeah.
Anything more you want to expand on with your kids? Because I did want to ask you about, I hear from parents, and I'm not a parent, so I don't know, but I hear from them when they say, I want to do this, but like, how do I cope with the stress of motherhood? Or like, I work all day and I come home and my kids are super rowdy and I just want like a moment to myself. And that like couple beers or couple glasses of wine just does it for me. Like, how do I get out of that cycle of needing the alcohol to cope with my, stressful at home life
Mhm.
or whatever? Like, talk about that experience and
Yeah.
how you were able to navigate that.
And that's a great question. And it's so valid because I remember kind of, again, justifying my drinking by saying, like, I deserve this because I had such a stressful day and I have to be around the kids. And I mean, let's just be real, kids are overstimulating. So you're like dealing with all kinds of things all day. So in your head, you're like, I deserve this drink so I can like de stress for a second or get a moment to myself. So I think a lot of it has to do with like, just kind of be real with yourself and understand, like, no, you don't really deserve it. It's actually not doing anything good for you. And there are other good coping mechanisms. Like, you absolutely do deserve the time to yourself and to decompress and do whatever. But there are other healthy ways to do it. Like I said, go to the gym for an hour, read a book, put some headphones in and ignore the kids for 5 minutes. Like, honestly believe it does go back to getting real with yourself and actually asking yourself the question, is this drink actually doing anything good for you? Or could you be doing the same thing with something that is better for you and you can achieve the same thing? So that for me was huge. I do want to, bring up that I have done a lot of trauma therapy to be where I am today. I'm very conscious about the cycles that I want to break for myself and for my kids. So this has been like it's been a work in progress for about 7 years, but there are a lot of amazing tools out there, audiobooks, podcasts, anything to help you kind of find what's going to be that like decompression thing for you that doesn't have to be alcohol.
Yeah, I appreciate you speaking to that because what alcohol does, like for example, talking about trauma work, my little understanding of it, but just understanding like the nervous system and being in fight
Mhm.
or flight mode, being in that state. If we have a glass of wine, man, it temporarily calms us down, and it really does feel like it's effective. You're talking about, is this really doing something for me? Some people could justify, yeah, it is. It's actually
Mhm.
really calming me down.
Yeah.
But as we know, there's this vicious cycle and cost that comes with it. So it's more like a band-aid on a wound that is just like getting deeper and deeper and not really
Mhm.
actually healing. So I appreciate you speaking to that, because I do find that ability to do that internal work and deal with the underlying trauma or the reasons why we drink is so beneficial and necessary. And also, like you said, being real with yourself, because that feedback I hear sometimes from people where they're just stuck in that mindset of like, I deserve this, and it does feel like a reward. But for
Yeah.
you, it sounds like you were able to kind of separate, like, okay, maybe that is true to some extent, but like, let me think this out, over the next hour, day, week, and what it's actually doing for me. Can you talk more about that process and how you switch that mindset of being someone that I
Mhm.
deserve this glass of wine, I earned it, to I deserve to go to CrossFit, or however that
Yeah.
change happened for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I think the medication had everything to do with it. Like, I think, working for Ria and just learning about it and actually being willing to take it and follow the process, I truly believe it saved my life. Because at that point, I had already been doing the trauma therapy for a while. I was already certified as a trauma recovery coach at that point, but I was still drinking. So, taking the medication and really helping with the actual physical craving, and then meeting the medication halfway and continuing to do the inner work that I was doing is how I was able to be so successful. Like, you have to meet the medication halfway, and you have to meet the therapy halfway if you're struggling with something that's like physically addicting to you. So just kind of following the process and continuing to do both, I didn't have to white knuckle the craving anymore. So that gave me the brain space to really think about, do I really deserve this drink? Or do I deserve to maybe go on a walk by myself? They both achieve the same thing.
Yeah. So can you, I just want to like dissect this, because like practically speaking, I want people to have like very practical ways. So say someone's in that nightly ritual of drinking wine while they're cooking dinner and they end up having a bottle or two. What is like one or two steps you would suggest based on your experience for someone to start breaking that habit? Because maybe an alcohol-free day is too much of a big
Mhm.
step right now. What are some, a couple of steps that you took or that you could suggest people take to get out of that cycle?
I would say, of course, take the medication and really wait an hour before you have your first glass of wine. And then after you have that glass of wine, in your habit, then switch it to a different drink. And I know it sounds like whatever doesn't work. I've tried that before. But the thing is that with the medication, it will work for you, because that's how you start to reprogram the brain, and that's how the medication works. Like, sure, it doesn't have to be an alcohol free day yet, but you don't have to drink as much anymore. And if you're consciously working through this, you will make yourself like have a sparkling water or have some tea or whatever else you want. Or you know what? I actually remember all of a sudden becoming like obsessed with like chocolate and like sugary things. And I wasn't before, but now I do know that it's like a very normal thing when you're kind of going through that process. That's okay. Lean into it for a little bit if that's what you have to do. But I would say just like consciously supporting your brain and really following the cues instead of fighting against them. Like, have your glass of wine and then switch to something else, and then just continue to do it. You will eventually build a habit out of it that just feels normal for you. Just like you initially build that wine drinking habit, you can do the same thing, just opposite.
Yeah, that's so well said, Marcella, because our brains love to learn habits. And just like we learn to like alcohol, we can learn to like other things, and just giving yourself that chance to try new things. I appreciate what you said, that, we can think, oh, whatever, like mindful drinking doesn't work, or having a non alcoholic drink after that glass of wine, it doesn't work. And I agree, it doesn't really work before naltrexone. It's kind of like pointless, and you just want to drink the real thing, But with the power of naltrexone, it really, those mindfulness techniques really do make a huge difference. And I would say they're really vital to success. I've worked with so many
Mhm.
people who were just kind of taking naltrexone, kicking back, not really doing much else. And they finally realized how important that is. I should track my drinks. I should pay attention. I should see whether or not I want that fourth or fifth drink. And just those thought exercises made all of the difference for them.
Mhm.
So okay, so when did you start naltrexone and TSM, and kind of where are you at today on your journey?
So I started in July of 2022 is when I started Naltrexone, and then I reached the extinction point at about 4 months. So I would say that I was definitely a very, like, fast responder to it. But I really believe that, like, my commitment to it had a lot to do with it. Like, like we discussed already, I was ready, I was following the rules, like, I knew what I wanted for myself. So I think that had a lot to do with me, like, reaching extinction after 4 months. And, for a little bit, I continued to be more of like a social drinker. Um, and so I would have like we would get together with our family a lot when my in-laws still lived here. They just moved to Tennessee last year. But back then, we would get together every weekend and we would go to the pool. So that was like my cue of like, that's when I'm gonna have some drinks. And I still did for a little bit. But after a while, I would say after maybe about 7 to 8 months, I was kind of more forcing myself to social drink than I actually wanted to at that point. And so I started to just kind of think about it. And I was like, do I even want to keep doing this? Because I truthfully did not crave it anymore. And just saying that still feels insane because I was so addicted to it for almost 20 years. Like before, I couldn't imagine my life without alcohol. And now it's this like, it feels like a lifetime away. And I'm like, alcohol, like, no, thank you. Like, it doesn't do anything good for me. Even in social events now, I've actually had the thought of like, oh, it's just like it's a Christmas party. I'll take some Naltrexone and I'll have a glass of wine. And then I end up just not because like it's just something that I really just don't crave anymore. And I'm still able to have a good time. So, if anybody's out there like worried, like, am I still gonna have fun? You will. Like it's it's not gonna take that away, but it's something you just have to experience for yourself and kind of have those like extinction sessions, like putting yourself in those situations without the drinking. So yeah, after how long has it been now? So help me do the math, 23, 24, 25, 2.5 years ish.
Yeah.
Now I just don't drink at all. I haven't had a sip of alcohol in 7 months.
Wow.
And I just truly don't want it. And my husband still has, social drinks here and there, or like we'll go out and people around me are drinking. And I just truly I'm okay with it. And that's amazing and that's life changing.
Yeah, it so is because I mean, I'm sure you tried to be alcohol free for periods of time before
Oh yeah.
naltrexone, and you just have that FOMO, like fear
Oh
of
yeah.
missing out, and you're like jealous everyone else can drink and you can't.
Mhm.
But with naltrexone and TSM, the desire just goes away to where I tell people alcohol is like my least favorite food. Like I don't like raw
Yeah.
oysters. So people can eat as many raw oysters as they want. They can offer it to me and I just have no temptation. And that's why I think a lot of people end up quitting drinking after TSM, whether it's a year or a few years later, because the desire just becomes non-existent. It's not that you're trying to not drink or you
Mm-mm.
you say, "Oh, I shouldn't drink." It's just like I really just don't want to, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It really is though, because like you said before, it was more of like I was forcing myself to even go a day without it. And now it's like months and I don't even think about it. And we can go out and you can have all the drinks you want, you do you. But like I'm not even tempted to. And that's just amazing.
Yeah, completely night and day. Well, I have a couple more questions for you as we
Yeah.
kind of start to wrap up. So it's something you just said that I wanted to highlight that's interesting. So you were drinking in a destructive way for nearly 2 decades, yet you reached extinction in 4 months. And I think that just highlights that, just because you've been drinking a long time doesn't necessarily mean it has to take you a long time to reach extinction, and vice versa. If you haven't had a problem for very long, it could take you longer. I think for you, it sounds like you were doing a lot of trauma work and therapy and working at this, kind of chipping away for years and years. And naltrexone was like the missing piece. So do you have you kind of spoke to it a bit, but like further insight on why it happened so quickly? Like you had that internal motivation, you were doing the trauma work, you were drinking mindfully. Like what else can you say there?
Um,
If there is
what
anything.
else? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do know, because of what we do, there are people sometimes that are like, "Oh, I already tried the medication and it didn't work." And my question's always like, did you meet it halfway though? Like, what else were you doing? And while it's an incredible and life changing medication, it's not a magic pill. Like, I always tell people it's not Tylenol. Like, you have a headache, you take Tylenol, and 30 minutes later, you're like, ooh, headache's gone. Amazing. That's not how this works. So I think going into it, understanding this could take some time. And, for some people, even 4 months feels like, ugh, that's forever. Like, I want to change it now. And the reality of it is, like, you have to, again, get real with yourself and think about it. Like, if that would have been my mindset and quit after a week, I had been drinking for 17 years. Like, time's going to pass anyway. You might as well continue doing the thing that you know is probably going to turn out to be really great for you instead of continuing on that same path. Because if you have reached the point of like, I want to try TSM, I want to try Naltrexone and get some help, there's a reason for that. And the reality of this is that when it comes to addiction, nothing changes if nothing changes, and like it's not gonna magically gonna go away. You can't take naltrexone for 2 days and just be like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. I don't drink anymore. Like, I think again, your mindset has everything to do with it, and just be patient and trust the process and really follow the rules. And I would say probably, I don't know, I want to say 10 out of 10, but I don't like saying that. So 9 times out of 10, it's probably gonna work for you if you're truly committed to it.
Yeah. Yeah, really well said. And just for those watching maybe who aren't familiar with what extinction means, following the Sinclair method, extinction is pharmacological extinction of the alcohol use disorder from the brain. So essentially, it reverses it back to the state the brain was in before the alcohol dependence or even alcohol was ever introduced. So it doesn't necessarily mean abstinence. Some people still drink following TSM post extinction, but it's like from a controlled place. It's not overboard. They're usually not craving alcohol anymore. But other people also end up going alcohol free at that point because, like we were talking about, the desire just goes away. So, how did you know you were at extinction? I wanted to ask you that.
I think when I would like open, so my drink of choice the last few years when I was drinking was White Claws. So I would say that, I would have a few sips, took my medication, waited an hour, I would have a few sips, and then just be like, not interested at all. And, before actually reaching the extinction point, it was like I could finish one and I could maybe go for another one. But then I reached that point to where I would have a sip and just truly not be interested in it. And that's when I was like, I think I'm good. Like, I think this like really worked amazing for me. That's what I really noticed.
Yeah, that off switch that was never there before, right? Like having a few sips would just be like a teaser, and you're like, oh, I need more. But
Oh
it's
yeah.
amazing what naltrexone does. So, as we wrap up, what final pieces of advice do you have for people? Understanding people are watching at different stages of the journey. Like, what do you want to tell people who are using this treatment to change their drinking habits?
I would say just for people in general, even thinking about using the treatment, like really be open-minded to it and not and give yourself a lot of grace. Just I see in a lot of forums sometimes that people are like, okay, today's day one again. Like I had a slip up yesterday, and that's not the reality of it. Like healing in any capacity is not linear by any means. You're gonna have ups, you're gonna have downs, and just not beating yourself up for like, oh my gosh, I had a glass of wine last night or a bottle of wine or whatever. Like, that's okay. Just continue and don't beat yourself up. Take your medication today, continue on your journey, and like I said, really be patient with it and really trust the process, and really commit to yourself. Like, you can do this. You can do hard things. We can all do hard things. But just don't give up on yourself would be my biggest advice for people, and really just let go of the shame that comes with it. I think like people like Katie and Thrive, and like people like myself and Ria, like we're working as hard as we can to take that stigma and shame away from it, but it's gonna take some time. So, if we can just kind of support each other and understand that alcohol addiction does not discriminate. You can be a CEO, you can be anybody in this world, and it's not going to discriminate. So you're not alone, first of all. And just be patient with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. It's so easy to get stuck in the shame cycle, especially if we've been battling this for years or decades and we've hurt people and we feel terrible about things we've said or done. It's just understandable. You're human, like we're going to feel those things, but I love your advice. Like don't stay there. Don't dwell on it. Realize that there's light at the end of this tunnel and this treatment is truly life-changing. Like it's completely freeing people from problem drinking. So thank you so much for sharing your story and being open and honest with us. I hope this helps people. And you kind of document your journey on social media, right? So how can people follow
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I talk about a lot of my passions, which is, like talking about my alcohol addiction and my recovery, as well as just trauma healing and then CrossFit, just exercise in general. So yeah, if you guys want to find me and follow along, my Instagram handle is at courage.toheal. And my name is Marcela Cabe. So you can find me.
Awesome. And I will drop it in the description below. Thank you so much, Marcella.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.